Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
All is well, all is well. First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for coming on the platform. I really appreciate you. This is definitely an honor.
Oh, well, thank you for the invitation.
Definitely, definitely. For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and definitely where you're from?
Sure. So I'm Brooke Macnamara. I'm an associate professor. I just started at Purdue University a couple of days ago. Before that, for 10 years, I was at Case Western Reserve University. I'm a cognitive psychologist and I study individual differences in expertise and achievement.
Wow, that's really cool. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm currently in Ghana now, but big shout out to Case and big shout out to Purdue as well. Let me see. Okay, now I wanted to ask you this. Um, Now, what type of courses do you teach exactly for the viewers who may not be familiar?
Yeah, so my job is primarily research. So I'm not teaching at all this semester, but when I am teaching next, I'll teach a graduate skill acquisition, expertise, and achievement course. And then in the fall, I'll teach a graduate meta analysis course. So, meta analysis is a statistical method where you take lots of studies, so everything that's already been done on a topic, and it's a way to synthesize across studies to see if you can get at a general answer to a question based on different types of evidence.
Ah, okay, okay, I got you, I got you. Now, when did you develop a passion for this field? Was this something you got into early on in life or later?
Later, so my undergraduate degree is actually in American Sign Language English interpretation. So I worked as a sign language interpreter for 10 years. I loved that work. I didn't actually mean to leave it. But while I was doing that work and while I was in training, I was really interested in why so many people struggled to do it. So it's a really high failure rate. And this isn't specific to American Sign Language. You could take any two, say, spoken languages, German and English. Um, and even people who grew up bilingual, many of them try to become simultaneous interpreters and then can't do it. So it's about a 90% failure rate, meaning they try to be interpreters and either can't graduate through a program or can't get the certification needed to work around the world. And I was really interested in why that was. It didn't seem to just be, oh, this person's smarter. And so I started wanting to kind of open up people's brains and figure out what was different about the people who were able to do it versus not. And that eventually led to getting a PhD in cognitive psychology. And now, more generally, I study the skill acquisition and complex performance variance. So, not specific to language. I look at sports, I look at academic achievement, all sorts of things.
Wow, wow, that's very interesting. I never thought about it like that because I've tried well, I wouldn't say I tried, but I got a chance to study abroad in DR, and I learned some Spanish.
Mhm.
I studied abroad in Brazil. I learned some Portuguese, but it's just amazing to be able to find people that can become fluent and can translate is that fast. Because I'm still at the point where I have to think about it and translate it in my mind and then say it. So.
Right. And even people who become fluent in both languages, often they can do sort of small level interpretation, say like a child for parents, with people that they know when they know the context. But when you are interpreting for complete strangers in a context you don't know, and you're having to shift. So, as you know, most languages don't follow the same grammatical structure. And so you're having to, for example, listen to one part of the message. You have to wait long enough to kind of know where it's going. Um, and because not all languages follow that same order, so you have to wait long enough. And then you're producing the second language while you're listening to a different part of the first message. So you're having to keep track of what you're doing while listening to something else and understand it. And there's just a lot of complex cognitive processes involved in that.
Wow, wow. Okay, okay. Now let me see. I was checking out your profile, and I had wanted to ask you about individual differences in cognitive ability. So is that along the same lines, or is that a little different?
Yes, that's absolutely along the same lines. So it's how do we differ in kind of how we process information? And the brains are so unique, so everybody thinks a little bit differently, and we vary a lot in kind of these different cognitive abilities. So, for example, how quickly you can take in information and make a decision about it, or how well you can reason about a novel problem that you've never seen before. So those are examples of different types of cognitive abilities that people vary in. And then that can predict all sorts of outcomes, right? So it can predict how quickly you can acquire a new skill. It's going to predict how well you do in school, et cetera. So that's, yeah, cognitive abilities. There's a wide range of cognitive abilities, but those are a couple of examples.
Okay, okay, that's real interesting. Now I was thinking about this. I don't know if it is relevant or not, but I love music. And I love hip hop, and I know there are some artists that can freestyle like off the top of their head, and they can make music that people will enjoy. And then you have other artists that may spend hours and weeks and days writing, and they'll make music that's equally as good. But it's just like some people just have that natural ability to say, write this song, and they can do it in 15 minutes. You know.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm fascinated by people who can very quickly think, improvisation. Certainly, so you can recognize that those are very different cognitive abilities, and as you point out, you could get to an equivalent level of performance, but we go about them in very different ways, and people tend to um, figure out kind of what works for them based on their interests and what they're good at, and then you get these very different processes and more complex features such as music. That's a great example.
Okay, okay. Now I would like to hear more about working memory capacity.
Sure. So that's one of the types of cognitive abilities that's often studied. So working memory capacity is it's a little tricky because scientists sort of disagree on exactly how to define it and what it is, but roughly speaking, one accepted definition is it's how much information you can hold in mind while you're dealing with something else. So while you're having to focus your attention elsewhere or be distracted. So an example might be sort of a simple example is you're at the grocery store and you need to buy three things and you need to keep that information in mind while you're searching for the one thing and picking it out. So that would be working memory. And then the capacity, people vary in kind of how much information they can hold in mind at once when they're focusing their attention elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good example because I know for myself, like I go to the grocery store for something, and then a lot of times I won't. I'll leave the grocery store without getting the thing that I came for. Because you might get a text message or a phone call, or see somebody you know, and y'all get to talking, and it just goes away. You know. So
Right. Exactly.
let me see. Okay, now what about fluid intelligence?
Yeah, so fluid intelligence, many psychologists differentiate fluid intelligence from crystallized intelligence. So, crystallized intelligence, just as a contrast, is how well you can use stored knowledge and skills. Whereas fluid intelligence is about kind of what I was describing before, that novel problem solving. So if it's something where you can't rely on experience, you can't rely on knowledge or skills that you already have, how well can you recognize a pattern in something? How well can you solve a problem? So this is often measured by you see a visual array and you have to figure out, there's a missing piece of the pattern. And so you have to figure out what that missing piece would be based on the available information that's there.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, now I want to ask you about this. Can artificial intelligence assistance cause skill atrophy?
Yeah, that's a question I've just started working on with computer scientists and electrical engineers. So we're interested in that question. So we think that it's certainly a possibility. So the idea is artificial intelligence is moving forward to being more and more complex and being able to take over more and more tasks that were previously the human expert's job alone, right? So you can think of a surgeon. So there's now robotic surgery, and that's been around for some time. But they're working on creating artificial intelligence assistants that would help the surgeon know how to navigate the tools inside the body. And so the question that we have is, well, we're sort of breaking this up in two ways. So one is, let's say you're an expert surgeon. You've been doing laparoscopic surgery for years. You're great at it. Now you start using an artificial intelligence tool that just helps you out, and it makes some decisions on your behalf so that you don't have to. Maybe when you're tired, you can kind of what's called cognitively offload that so that the assistant can just sort of start doing that for you. And you do that for years. Now, let's say 5 years later, you're using this artificial intelligence daily. 5 years later, it breaks and it's not available. Are you still an expert at the task? How well can you function if it's taken away from you, or have your skills atrophied? So we think that it's certainly a possibility that that is the case. And then we're also interested in how it might hinder skill development. So now let's say you're a med student and you're learning, or say you're a surgical resident, you're learning surgery, and you never learn it without an artificial assistant. You've always learned it with an assistant. And again, let's say 5 years later, it's taken away from you. Did you ever develop the skills to be able to perform the surgery without that assistance? So we're, I don't want to be a, reactionary technology is bad kind of a thing. AI in particular is very complex, and there's biases and there's negative attributes. And this is kind of one area that we think hasn't been looked at of how it might impact the human skills and their development. So it's an open question right now. We think that it's possible, and we're working on trying to generate experiments where we can test to see if that's the case.
Oh, okay. Wow, that'll be interesting to see the results of that. I know this for myself. Like maybe at least like the last 10 years. Of course, I've been texting and typing and texting and typing. And I was looking at my handwriting, and I was kind of ashamed of it. It feels like it just fell all the way off. So I've been challenging myself to write more things out and also take my time and do things like that. So I feel like definitely, the technology has kind of diminished my natural skills.
Or things like using GPS instead of having to learn without it and use either a physical map or just sort of figure it out yourself. People probably aren't quite as good at navigating as we used to be based on GPS. Now, GPS isn't, there's sort of some AI in it, but it's not, it's more an algorithm, more computer technology. It's not really sort of that expertise level of AI, even though, again, Google Maps uses some of that. Or even a simpler example is before cell phones, people had so many phone numbers that they had memorized. And now maybe we know ourselves and our parents and a friend or something, like at best, right? We don't remember phone numbers anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely true. When I was younger, I could remember all of my friends' numbers and call their house, but I just remember like my mom number and my number.
Yeah.
Okay, now Now, what about beliefs on influence achievements?
Yeah, I'm really pretty interested in this lately. So there are a lot of popular theories that what people believe has these profound effects on lots of different things, but achievement and academic achievement specifically being the one that has been most cited. So, for example, if you've heard of growth mindset, it's the idea that if you believe that your say intelligence can grow with efforts, like if you work hard you'll become smarter, versus if you have what's called a fixed mindset, if you believe that traits are generally stable, you can learn new things, but working hard isn't going to make you smarter. The idea is that these have downstream effects. So if you have this growth mindset, then you will try harder and you're focused on learning, and therefore you're going to see greater achievement, whether or not it actually has an impact on your intelligence. Whereas if you have a fixed mindset, you're just going to give up when facing a challenge, and therefore you won't see as much achievement. And so this really had a big impact in schools. Parents, people started raising their children differently. And my work has shown that sort of these big claims seem to be stronger than the evidence warrants. So sometimes you can see some small effects. Often you don't see any effects. It's an idea that people kind of want to embrace. Like it sounds good that if you just essentially have a belief and therefore you work harder, you'll achieve more. But I think that it isn't covering enough of the story. So complex human performance is complex and achievement is complex. And it is absolutely partially how much effort you put into it, but it's also the resources that you're given. It's also if you're facing societal systemic barriers or given opportunities, that there's just a lot of factors that go into it, and kind of saying that, oh, it's this one thing and this will solve problems that we see seems to be a bit oversimplified. And so I'm interested in why we embrace ideas like this. A similar one is, if you've heard of the 10,000 hour rule, with 10,000 hours of practice, anyone can be an expert in anything. And again, that's completely overstated. That's not the case at all. Certainly, if you don't try, you can't be an expert. But sometimes people will just work and work and work and not really get to a certain place, and other people can do that very quickly. And again, there's lots of factors that go into that. So why people believe this, I think that we like simple explanations for complex problems. They're a lot easier to talk about as opposed to getting into the nuances. And you can repeat them, and then people hear that and they're like, oh yeah, that sounds right. I heard that before. 10,000 hours, that's it. So I think that's sort of a cognitive bias that goes into them. I think that the issue with that, sort of like what I was saying, is that it can lead to a deficit ideology. So if you say, well, this person isn't succeeding, well, they just have the wrong mindset, or they're just not working hard enough. And so not only does it situate the problem within the individual, when there could very easily be external factors as well, but it can then divert resources away from, say, fixing structural issues or barriers, and it's guided then towards trying to fix or change people themselves, sort of change the beliefs that they have, as though that will solve things. So I'm interested in both the beliefs and then why we believe those beliefs. So that's something I'm currently working on.
Wow. I gotta take my hat off to you, because I feel like the average person takes a lot of those different factors for granted. Like you say, people may have their beliefs, or they may just feel like if I work at it for 10,000 hours, I'm going to be great at this.
Yeah.
And I notice, like, growing up, some of my friends, it seemed like they was good at everything. We was all playing outside the same amount of time, but it just seemed like certain things they would just have this natural knack. This person could run fast, or this person could play this sport better than the other one. But like you say, it's just so many factors, and for you to take your time and to look into those things, so we can utilize, the findings of your research and use them to make our lives better. That's really inspiring.
Good. Yeah, I'd like it to be the case where people can um, figure out what is a good match for them. So something else that we tend to do based on these beliefs is parents encourage their kids to, say, start a sport early or start playing a musical instrument early, and then want them to just keep continuing so that they can be Yo-Yo Ma or Serena Williams. But there's a lot of factors, and some of my research has demonstrated that people who have a diverse range of experiences when they're young are more likely to be the very, very top, the Olympians, for example. And so it seems that we don't know exactly why that is. But there's probably a few reasons, right? So one of it is just going to be you're less likely to experience burnout or overuse injuries if it's sports or music. But it's probably also a lot of it is finding your optimal match, right? So if you experience lots of different things, you can find, say, the sport that best matches your talents and preferences, as opposed to just hoping that by luck, the one thing that you started when you were 4 is the best thing for you that you are going to enjoy for the rest of your life. So yeah, I want people to realize that these are really complex. There are, motivations, preferences, talents, individual differences in cognitive abilities that all play a role, as well as big external societal factors that play a role. And we need to think about these issues on multiple levels, from internal to external.
Wow, wow, that's a great point. Now I wanted to ask you about this. Have you written any books? Have you thought about doing documentaries, based on the work that you have done?
I haven't. I haven't thought about doing a documentary. I haven't really written a book. I edited. So sometimes in academic circles, what you'll do is you'll invite other researchers to write chapters, and you put together a book as an editor. So I was a co-editor for a book on expertise. So I sort of more produced the book, if you will, and wrote a chapter in the introduction in it. But I haven't written a book that's, more sort of like widely read for people. I don't know. There's a lot out there for sort of what's called like pop psychology. And I think that gets tricky because in order for it to be something that people actually want to read, it's really easy to start moving into these sort of pithy ideas that are oversimplified, that isn't really grounded on kind of all the nuance of and complexity of the research and the evidence and how the world works. But people want to read that less. So I'm not sure there'd be a market for the kind of research that I do.
Okay, okay, I understand. Now I can ask you about this. You had mentioned editing. Now, a lot of readers they take for granted the role of an editor. What exactly does an editor do in comparison to, say, an author that just wrote the book?
Yeah, that's a complex question. It depends on sort of the genre, the area, and it also there's lots of different types of editors. So in this role, what I was doing was basically deciding the structure of the book, what topics that we wanted to include, and then reaching out to experts on those topics to say, hey, would you write a chapter? And then once they gave a draft, giving them feedback, deciding how long the whole book was going to be, working with the publisher to produce this book. So how the editorial role worked there, but it can be very, very different in other types of books.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, okay, I think we covered everything. So again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the platform. I thank you for your patience. It really means a lot to me for you to break down that information because you've been doing so much work and so many years you've invested into this. So for the viewers to be able to hear firsthand some things, it really means a lot to me. And I definitely look forward to the work that you have to come in the future.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
All right, all right. So to the viewers, until next time, peace.